I'm here with Annie Sparrow, who is a clinician and professor at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, also very well known for having worked in many of the world's most devastating combat zones. We're talking about the earthquake, Dr. Sparrow. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you, Diane.
So we've talked about the rescue efforts with this devastating earthquake in Turkey. From what I've heard, about 15% or so of the victims have been in Syria, nearby Syria. You've written about the humanitarian crisis on the other side of the border. Give us a sense of really what's the picture right now.
Thanks for having me, Diane. It's very clear when we look at it from here, of course, we can see this picture where dozens of countries have provided masses of aid to Turkey and are there operating, providing relief teams, search and rescue efforts, sensors, dogs, logistics, capacity, pretty much everything that is needed. And that's important because Turkey has suffered a devastating event, of course, where so many apartment buildings have simply collapsed across east southern Turkey. And then we see Syria. And in northwest Syria, which is home to 4.5 million Syrians, and they're just packed into this tiny area, which is 4% of the country. And of those 4.5 million, 2 million of them were already living in what we call camps of last resort. So they're incredibly vulnerable, and there's no one there to help them. The first 3 days, nothing went across the border except dead bodies being returned from Turkey into Syria so they could be buried at home. And the UN convoys that did actually reach Syria on Thursday and Friday had nothing useful there to help the search and rescue efforts. There was no fuel, there was no spare parts for the digging equipment, there was no earth-moving machinery. There was nothing there that actually helped them shift the rubble, get to the victims. People were like clawing away at the rubble with their hands trying to find people. So it's not surprising we see this actually relatively high number, well over 2,000 Syrians that have died in northwest Syria. And then there's several hundred that have died in government-controlled areas. And then there are about 3,000 more Syrians that died within Turkey. Well, the huge discrepancy is between that Syrians have been left on their own, and in Turkey they are being assisted by this massive, and that's a great thing, and that it has generated this massive international response. But we need to see that in Syria as well.
Well, how much of this comes down to, obviously we've got the politics. We have President, Bashar al-Assad. Is there the same welcoming of international efforts? Because typically I think there has been some resistance on the part of Syria because of, frankly, the politics that went on before this happened. What are we seeing?
Well, we see that, don't we? In that if Assad actually cared about the humanitarian situation of his citizens, of Syrian citizens, then he should have opened the border last Monday. This is an area, this is like the last holdout after 10 years where we've seen every other population in Aleppo, in eastern Ghouta, like fall, and then all of these populations have then shifted into this remaining area of Idlib and Aleppo. If he had cared, then he could have opened up the borders last Monday, last Tuesday. And yet, to do it now, after all hope of finding any survivors is just lost, then it's fairly clear that it is a political calculus rather than a humanitarian calculus. So, and also given that it is a 3-month initiative, it's reversible, it doesn't actually help us a lot in the long term when we're thinking about not just the immediate needs, but how to actually help this population build some recovery, some resilience going forward. So it's a pretty hollow, move, and not that we shouldn't make the most of it. And I think that's a very important thing here. We should now, like all the countries that are now in Turkey providing relief, are positioned to now go into Syria and to provide that same relief. The US, across all of the military has extraordinary capacity to help on so many levels, from the logistics to the supply chains to the hospital ships. Countries across the world have masses of reserves of tents, of water treatment, of prefabricated buildings, of the fuel. I mean, of all the things that you need that are not typically part of the humanitarian response that's ongoing. So, there's a lot of opportunity here, and we've seen Assad exploit that opportunity already to look like he is doing the humanitarian thing. But it's also up to countries to seize this opportunity to now say, come on, earthquakes trumps a border, which if we let it remain closed, and we've seen this, means masses of loss of human